Welcome, everyone. This is your host, Adam Coleman. And with me today, we have Irene King. She's been a family law attorney for almost 20 years now and is the founder of King Collaborative Family Law here in Charlotte. Irene is an expert on collaborative divorce. So, we're going to go through and take a deeper dive into that world, understand the differences between collaborative divorce compared to mediation and litigation. So, Irene, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Adam. It's my pleasure to be here today.
Since you're the expert, I wanted to kind of get your take on where the collaborative divorce space was, what the pros and the cons are. But before we begin, tell us a little bit about yourself and what made you decide to go into family law.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I have been practicing almost 20 years, and I think most people go to law school to help people. I hear that a lot, and that being a lawyer is a helping profession. And then once we gravitate into the field and get our feet wet, it turns into something else. It's an intense profession. So when I landed in Charlotte out of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where I went to law school, I didn't really have an expectation of how to practice law. And I landed at James McElroy and Deal, which is one of the best litigation firms in North Carolina, in my opinion. But my practice was fully focused on litigation and family law exclusively. So I learned from Bill Deal himself how to try a family case from soup to nuts, everything that I needed to know. And over time, I learned to put on my armor and take out my swords and go into the courtroom and wield them with intelligence, but with the mindset that it was my job to win in that courtroom. And over many, many years, the idea of winning took on a definition of its own. And anyone who has been in the court process and has especially been in the family law realm in a courtroom, it's an ugly place. It's the emergency room for families. And judges are very well-intentioned, intelligent people themselves, but they only have so much time to devote to a family. And so oftentimes they only have the chance to take a hacksaw and do what they can for a family and give a ruling, and that ruling sticks for a very, very long time. And often I saw that families would perpetuate conflict in the court system because there's so much gamesmanship that when you go to court and you win, oftentimes there's a next level. There's a what's next. And so people one up themselves. And I saw so much trauma and so much turmoil and so much conflict over the years. Things really hit home for me, though, in 2013 and 2014 when my own parents went through a divorce. And I was 35 at the time, fully functioning, high-powered divorce attorney, and had all the tools to handle what they were going through. But I found myself embroiled in it. And I won't get into the details of that, but it taught me the level of authority and the role of attorneys in the process and how much of a role we play. And I decided at that time that it was time for me to put down my swords and take off my armor and find a different way to resolve family law cases, and that going to court and declaring war was not the way that I saw myself practicing law into the future. So in 2015, I made kind of a drastic decision to leave James McElroy and Deal, to stop trying cases, and I embarked on starting King Collaborative Family Law, where I've been ever since. I have a fully out-of-court practice. I tried my last case in a courtroom in 2015, and I have been a problem solver, handling matters through the mediation process and the collaborative divorce process ever since.
Can you give us a quick summary? We've talked about the collaborative divorce process on the show a few times, but you're the expert. So, can you give us a quick summary of what collaborative divorce is and how it differs from the other types of divorce?
Yes. So a very simple definition of the collaborative divorce process is that it's a conflict resolution process. And the spouses commit in writing to work together to resolve all issues without threatening or resorting to litigation. And there's a lot to the process that makes it work. But basically, the elements are that you have a written agreement. Each client has an attorney who is collaboratively trained. And the agreement says that if for any reason the process terminates, the lawyers are disqualified from representing the clients in litigation. And the founder of Collaborative Law, Stu Webb, who started this whole process in the 1990s, he really says you need two things: the mindset for this work and the disqualification clause. And the process is structured, but it's flexible as well and designed to ensure that families who choose this process make it through. I think the best part of it is that it involves a team of professionals. So while each party is represented by their own attorney, they're supported by a team of professionals who's skilled in family systems and communication, in interpersonal relationships, who's experts in finances, and the team supports the family in moving through the process to the ultimate goal of resolution.
Now, one opinion that I've heard from other people, or a misconception, I would say, is that having this framework of other team members, other people involved, it can be more expensive than just having an attorney involved. Can you speak to the truth or the falsehood of that, and then kind of where that really fits in with the advantages of the collaborative space?
Absolutely. I've heard that a lot, and I resonate with that. Any divorce is so expensive. No one wants to put family resources towards divorce, right? But the ultimate goal of the professionals who are involved in a collaborative divorce team is to reserve the resources for the particular need of the family. For instance, the family may hire a financial neutral so that documents are gathered in one space. There's one request for documents to be gathered. There's no question that all of the documents will be shared with everyone so that everyone has the same opportunity to look at the same materials to make good decisions in going through the process. So that's one aspect that is really, really helpful. And in doing so, the attorneys take a back seat in the process. I like that part because I see my role as a guide, not the dictator, not the puppeteer, not the controller. That's what's so different about litigation, is that in litigation, the attorney is the star of the show, if you will. In collaboration, the clients control the process and the attorneys are guides. We're still advocates for our clients, but we don't do every little piece of the puzzle. We either delegate or allow the authority to be shared. And that's so important because that way you can triage the financial issues from the legal issues, from the emotional issues. And while, for instance, while the financial neutral is working on their piece of the puzzle, the attorneys may not be doing anything. We're not going to have meetings just to have meetings. So while the financial piece is going, perhaps there's a divorce coach that is working with the parties on a parenting plan or is working with them on specific communication issues and working to ameliorate those issues as the couple is going through the process. So then when we get to the team meetings, where we're working from an agenda and constructively problem solving through the issues that need to be solved, everything that needs to be in place to have constructive, effective conversations is working behind the scenes. So in that way, while it can feel like you're splitting expenses amongst 4 different professionals, perhaps, the idea is to maximize the efficiency of that professional's work and contribute the work directly to the team meetings so that we can all work together to get an outcome that is best for the family.
You have a unique perspective just because you've seen both sides and really probably the extremes of both sides. Where does the litigation piece fit in? How does it differ when you were a litigating attorney in terms of all these other parties? Were they getting involved, or was it strictly, like you said, the attorney kind of steering the ship and running the show? Or how did that work with the other team members from what you've seen in the past?
So in the litigation process, there are no team members. There are experts that are hired to present the side that you want presented. So an attorney hires an expert, for instance, to do an appraisal, right? And that appraisal produces a report. Well, the other spouse is going to hire their own expert, and that expert's going to have their own report. And then the dueling reports need to be synthesized through depositions and in the court itself, so that by the end of it, you never have an agreed upon number. It's always something that is in conflict and thought about and analyzed and dealt with in a conflictual way. So in collaboration, there's one expert that is hired to do a job. And while clients may disagree about certain things that the expert has an opinion about, or the expert shares, or the process that's used, the idea of working in a team is that we triage that issue right away. And all of the professionals, because they're collaboratively trained, have the skill set to work with the issue right now. We don't spot an issue and then say, we'll file a motion about that and deal with that in 3 months or 6 months, or have a trial about that in 18 months. We are dealing with issues in real time and solving problems along the way.
So regardless of the type, you're obviously going to have those other experts or specialists involved. It's just you're going to have the bias that's related to the litigation side, where almost you're essentially paying for extra third-party experts in their sense, whereas collaborative, you're not having to go through that process. You just have an unbiased third party that understands the process, and they're just working for both people and going through collaboratively, as opposed to you're fighting and butting heads the whole time. Is that fair to say?
It absolutely is. That's a great encapsulation of the difference.
So cost-wise, again, you have a firsthand experience of this, more so than most people, obviously, to see the litigation side and the collaborative side. What would you guess on average, how much more expensive is the litigation if you go that route versus a collaborative?
So in my experience, in my practice, litigation could be hundreds of thousands of dollars because of the requirement to paper the process and to have experts and to be reactive as opposed to proactive in dealing with issues. Costs just snowballed out of control, and people would deplete their savings. They would cash in retirement accounts. They would get to the point where they would do anything and everything to keep it going, because once you're in it, you can't just fold and get out of it. Now, that's a little dramatic to say, but there's other ways, hopefully, of resolving matters that are in litigation before they get to the courtroom steps. Mediation is one opportunity for that, which we can talk about. But the costs are not controllable, and some of them aren't foreseeable a lot of the time. In collaboration, because the clients are in the driver's seat, they can pick and choose. So, for instance, a financial neutral may not be necessary or feasible for every family. A divorce coach, while I think is the number one person to have involved in a collaborative team, that person may not be necessary for a specific family or a specific reason, or say there are no children and that person does not need to be involved. There's a lot of choice. And I think by keeping the control with the family can decide who's invited to the process and therefore conserve resources for a specific purpose that's maybe more important than another purpose. So I find that the costs cannot compare to my litigation days. They're so much lower, and they vary. They vary because in collaboration, like I said, you're picking and choosing, and to some degree, honestly, it's a premium process. It's an investment, in my opinion, in the legacy of the family. It sets the tone for the future. It sometimes leaves the space that the family was in a better place than when they started the process, and plants the seeds for going to college graduations and weddings and being in the same place when grandbabies are born. And I know that when I handle a matter in the collaborative process, I'm keeping that in mind. My values are invested as a professional in the family's well-being long after the divorce is over. And that may be the number one difference between a litigator's viewpoint of their role and job in a family's life in a case, and a collaborative attorney's viewpoint in their role in a family's matter.
And I'm assuming that was a different mindset when you were a litigator, just because that was the job, that was the role that you were playing. This mindset was totally different at that point, correct?
Totally different. Always strive to be empathetic and listen to my client's needs. But in a court process, you have to follow specific rules. You have to be utterly prepared beyond measure. And you have to make strategic moves in such a way that you can't always keep the client's future in your head, because you're dealing with the here and now, and you're always in it. There's always something going on in litigation that you have to address immediately.
Now, I don't want to make it seem like litigation and collaborative are the only two options. Obviously, we spoke to mediation as another option, and most cases don't go to litigation. I think that's what conceptually people have in their mind of like, all right, that's what this divorce process looks like. But the majority of them are going through mediation in most cases. So maybe walk us through, where does the difference lie between the collaborative process and the mediation, and kind of the pros and the cons to those two?
So I am a certified mediator, and I earned my certification through the North Carolina Dispute Resolution Commission almost 9 or 10 years ago. So as a neutral mediator, it's a privilege when I have the opportunity to mediate a litigated matter and we come to a resolution, and that case is then taken off the docket. So I think mediation is a positive process. The challenge with it is that mediations often happen in one day. Sometimes they happen over 1, 2, or 3 different days if people are represented by attorneys. But the clients feel like it's kind of a pressure cooker situation where they need to make a decision or else, and they need to come to an agreement or else, and the or else is, or else they're going to court. And there may be a court date that's looming that's adding an intensity to coming to an agreement. And so within the mediation process, it's kind of a shortened form of positional bargaining, because one side presents an offer, and then there's shuttle diplomacy by the mediator, and then that mediator takes the offer to the other room, and the other room chops it up, changes it around, and sends back a counter offer. And we go back and forth all day or over several days. And typically, yes, you're right, that does produce an agreement. The reason collaboration is so different is that it's designed to be a structured process set with meetings that have agendas, that have goals, that have built-in timelines for getting to an agreement. So there is never the pressure on a specific day for possibly 8 hours at a time to come to an agreement, or else. There really isn't an or else, because the participation agreement that governs the collaborative process is the glue that keeps everybody together and keeps them all focused on getting the family through this process so that they can have an agreement that's lasting. And I think that's the real difference.
Obviously, you're focused on collaborative divorce. When would there not be a situation where somebody should go collaborative?
So I always bring up collaboration in my consultations. I have put myself out there as a practitioner who has a fully out of court practice. So if people approach me about litigation or they're involved in litigation, then I typically refer those people out, but I give them some education about the collaborative process. I'd love to say, but I'm incredibly biased, that the collaborative divorce process is something that every family should consider. I realize, however, that there are extreme circumstances where there are personality disorders that have been unaddressed. There has been a level of domestic violence that can't be resolved around the same table. There are other family related issues that make the interpersonal dynamics so difficult that the level of trust is so broken that people absolutely cannot imagine coming to an agreement with their spouse, even with the help of a team. I would say that in my experience, litigation is like the easy valve, because you say, we can't deal with each other. We need this third person to make a decision for us. Whereas if you have the really critically difficult issues, having a team of professionals who are skilled mentally, financially, and legally to help support you through and develop creative solutions alongside you, that's the best opportunity for families to have a lasting resolution. So, in my opinion, I really feel like collaboration is something every family should consider.
So if somebody's thinking about, they're going through this process and they're trying to weigh the options of, do I want to go mediation? Do I want to go collaborative? Is it the attorney that you think is the first point of contact? Is it the divorce coach? Is there the network that they go through to get assigned to teams? What do you see as the most successful way of figuring out which path you should go down?
I take a really flexible approach to that. So people call me, and I think the biggest question is, this sounds great to me, but my spouse is not on board, or
Right.
my spouse wouldn't even consider this. What do I do? And there are a lot of online resources through the Charlotte Collaborative Divorce Professionals and the North Carolina Collaborative Attorney Network and other resources, the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, that offer resources to learn about collaborative divorce. So that's one way of approaching the subject with a spouse who may be reticent to even have a conversation about what comes next. But I also think that having a conversation with other professionals can be very helpful. So, a couple going to talk to a divorce coach one time about process options, going to a financial expert to talk about process options and how collaboration can work for their family. That's an idea. Some of my colleagues have process oriented education sessions with both spouses where there's no legal advice that's provided, but an attorney can go through each process option with the couple, and the couple can take that information and decide for themselves whether the collaborative divorce process feels like a fit.
And I think that's the key. I think the norm is just, oh, I'm going through this process. I'm going to search for a divorce attorney, and not knowing, all right, what type of divorce attorney. It could be back in your litigation days, they could have gotten you then, or they could have gotten you now in the collaborative space, and it's two totally different things. And they just don't have that understanding or education behind it. That's the general purpose of all this, to go through and tell people that there's other options involved. So I guess before we finish up, any final thoughts on your side, any other advice that you would give for somebody thinking about going down this path, whether it's collaborative, mediation, litigation, whatever the case may be, what type of advice would you give early on for people?
I think it's really important for people when they're interviewing an attorney. I completely resonate with the idea that it is not fun to pay an attorney to sit down and talk with them about what they could do in a matter. And I really encourage people before they sit down with an attorney to think through what is most important to me. What do I need help with? What is my goal? And I'm not talking about outcome, like I only want to pay this amount in alimony, or I really want the house, but a goal for 10 years down the road and envisioning that time that I talked about in terms of having a relationship with this spouse for the time when there's graduations and weddings and grandbabies and things like that. Because sitting down with an attorney, you want to know what their motivation is, what their values are, what their communication style is, what their responsiveness is like, what they can expect in terms of working together on a one-on-one basis. They have staff. I can think of so many questions that I tend to bring up at my consultations that people haven't really thought about and that are really important to the attorney-client relationship. In my practice, the way that I structured a consultation when I was a litigation attorney is completely different from the way I have a conversation with a potential client now. I want to hear from people and listen to their story. And if you're sitting with an attorney who is just talking at you the whole time and it's going over your head because it's a really stressful experience, that may not be the right person to guide you through this incredibly important and often devastating time in your life.
That's perfect advice. And I think that's the key, is making sure you get people that are on the right mindset as what you're going down, like what goals you have for the process, and getting people that align with those goals as well. Like you said, there's so many different extremes of personalities and different approaches that are totally different, that learning about those different approaches ahead of time so that you can not just get steered down the wrong path is hugely valuable. So I really appreciate you taking the time to educate us about the collaborative process. If anybody would like to reach out to you or get more information about the services that you offer, what's the best way to look for you?
Feel free to email me, Irene at kingcollaborativelaw.com. My website is kingcollaborativelaw.com, and I'm glad to reach out and share more about myself and my approach. And I appreciate people like you who are devoted to guiding people in this space. I think your services are so important, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share more about mine.
No, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you being on here, and certainly hope everybody gets something out of this and can get a little bit more advice from you. So I'll make sure to include the descriptions and the website, but certainly I appreciate you taking the time, Irene.
Thanks, Adam.